Hi, it's Graham and welcome to Does It Matter again. Um, Probably a shorter one today, talking about gender. Oh, everyone's backs away from the screen. Um, I call it the gendification of topics, the gendification of human issues. Um, are there real issues to do with men and women? Absolutely. Okay, the male homeless rate, individual male homeless rate is horrifying and rising globally, and it's always been a massive rate. The male suicide rate is huge. The number of women and children fleeing domestic violence, left in poverty by the breakup of relationships as well, the lack of shelters for women and children, particularly here in Australia, is horrifying. These are real legitimate issues that do correspond nominally to gender. But the problem is that the common thread is there that both groups of people are suffering very similar the same problems: a lack of funding, a lack of support, and the results of family dissolution. So, in the face of that, genderfying, turning it into a male or female issue rather than saying that violence is an issue, that neglect is an issue, that psychological battery as well as physical battery is an issue, that manipulating and being cruel to one another is an issue, being dishonest with one another is an issue, inequity in the courts, particularly family courts, is an issue. Police attitudes towards, though I think they've improved enormously, towards DV and towards family disturbances, full stop. These are all complex issues, and these are all important issues, and they rise above whether it's a man or a woman or even a child. Okay, human beings in suffering, human beings in peril. That's what I see. It doesn't mean I can't talk about the fact that it's women who die more routinely in domestic violence, because that's a serious issue. Men are much stronger. If men and women engage in violence, women usually come out much worse off. Okay, that's a reality. I have no intention or desire to minimise it or diminish it in any way, shape or form. I also know that since the 80s we've known full well that female spouses are as or more likely to instigate physical violence than the male, and in Australia it's considerably high. It's over 60%. Doesn't justify anything that might be done in return, though that's understandable. If you're assaulted by anyone, you might be inclined to resist that assault with violence yourself, and that complicates and muddies waters that in a way that's rarely acknowledged by any of the current pundits. Violence in the home is wrong. It is that simple. You cannot have violent adults, you cannot have violent children. It has to be dealt with. Has to be. But there's a huge amount of unacknowledged violence. I've noticed it in a couple of different ways, and I'll go into this so that you understand that. I have witnessed a tidal wave of violence by women against men that just doesn't make the news. It doesn't make most statistics, though some studies have come out to show a very strong evidence for women being equally, if not more, violent towards their spouses and their partners, and even other random men, than as compared to the male population. And the violence of people with cognitive behavioural issues, Asperger's, autism, so on and so on. These issues are painful and horrible and tragic because in many cases, particularly in the latter, they don't have much of a choice. And it's often a management issue, how much help they got earlier on before their cognitive state progressed, so on and so on. But we do need to discuss them, and they are complicated issues. So what I see is the media, the fourth estate again, failing us. Governments failing us by choosing the easiest, simplest, most binary approach to studying social problems like family and domestic violence and societal violence in general, by simply reducing it to the lowest common denominator of men and women. Okay, but we also have a huge rising problem with children assaulting their parents and sometimes grandparents. And there are many complex reasons for that, and anyone who's worked in social work understands this and knows it's far from black and white. But why do we keep seeing black and white approaches, black and white issues, man bad, woman victim all the time? Why do we continue to see the different participants portrayed in binary, static ways? Men are far more dangerous in terms of physical violence than women, but that doesn't mean that women don't hurt men as egregiously in their own way, if not physically, emotionally, humiliate them, make them fearful for their life, for the retention of their family, so on and so on. This happens all the time. We don't discuss it. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about the fact that there are parents fearing their own children in their own homes. But they love those children. They might even be in charge of caring for those children because of the special needs those children have. We don't talk about that much. It's not discussed, and yet it's a growing problem. It's a statistically significant problem. It just seems to me that we're cherry picking. The media and government cherry pick the ways in which they'll discuss societal problems, and it gets my goat enormously because it hurts everyone. And it also, at a time where we need to be allies, where we need to be working together, it promotes divisiveness, partisanship, tribalism. Okay, it promotes that. So that when a woman writes about her experiences providing therapy and assistance to women fleeing family violence, there's a whataboutery going on left, right, and centre from men who are feeling attacked and defensive for good reason often, and that doesn't help. That doesn't help. It divides and pushes men apart, men and women apart when they most need to be together. When you genderify something, you create a divide. When you make generalizations about both men and women, when we stereotype each other, we create toxic assumptions. We create unbelievable assumptions about each other. I have yet to see in a long life of dealing with human conflict. I work security on the door and in a variety of other capacities for 34 years, and I have yet to see any evidence that women are substantially less violent than men. They are less effective in their violence than men, and they have a wider variety of psychological and emotional tools at play than men. They're much more sophisticated than men are generally at that, though there are plenty of men who are equally game playing in that area. But as a general rule, people are really horrible to each other when they have vested reasons to. If there's leverage to be gained, if there's something to be gained, if people are sufficiently hurt, they will do almost anything. Will they lie? Yes. Men will lie, women will lie, children will lie, everyone will lie. The concept that the Me Too movement put up that people don't lie, it's rubbish. Do most of them lie? Probably not. However, in certain select circumstances that come up often in these cases, there's often a great deal of reason to lie, obfuscate, omit, or otherwise curate the truth to present yourself in a better light. And everyone to some degree does it, or at least finds the temptation, succumbs to some degree to the temptation to do it. Some people are outright blatant in it, but the reality is that people do lie. People tell part of the truth, people tell some of the truth, people twist it and reframe things to present themselves most favourably. Of course, they have a lot to win or lose by doing that. People also misunderstand each other. People are brutal. People are cruel to each other. And when it gets physical, women are definitely the biggest losers in that component. But women also instigate as much or more of the violence than men do. So there needs to be a discussion about that. How could we reduce the violence simply by addressing violence as the issue rather than just men or women? I would like to see that. I would like to see us discussing family violence in its holistic and true terms rather than the ideologically perpetuated terms that don't allow for decent psychological and sociological solutions, ones that actually encompass the full range of reasons that people are cruel to each other. Because I'm going to tell you now, it's not all controlling husbands or wives who are trying to ruin their partner's life or control them. It's not always that. Sometimes they have borderline personality disorder. Sometimes they have rage disorders. They have schizophrenia. They have, those schizophrenics are not generally violent, but some can be. Sometimes they have drug dependency issues. Sometimes they have PTSD. They have CTE and traumatic brain injuries. There are so many reasons that create so many different profiles for why people treat each other poorly, why they gamble, why they drink, why they're violent, why they're neglectful, why they do all the things that, shitty things that humans do to each other. And we need to look at those honestly with open eyes, bear the pain, grit our teeth, and accept the fact that life is more complicated and less satisfying ideologically than we want it to be. That people are quite horrible to each other sometimes, and people fail woefully. And that we need to be there to help them. All of them. Not the ones we like, not the ones that we favour. Everyone needs to be assisted. I mean, primarily the victims first and foremost, absolutely. But if you don't help the perpetrators, who often themselves were victims, by the way, too, more often than not, if you don't help the perpetrators, if you don't solve the problem, you're just storing up woe for the future. You're storing up more trouble for the future. That's all we're doing. So I wish we could get away from ethnicizing as well and genderifying issues that are largely class, socioeconomic, and psychologically based issues. They're issues of mental health. They're issues of social disruption, failed globalization, economic disruptions, changes in the way that we mate, the way that we partner up, the shrinking of the family, the vast shrinking of the Australian family to a much smaller and more fragile, less resilient social network. Our increasing dependence on social media and on other external networks that just don't meet the gaps. They don't compensate properly for what we've given up. Not yet anyway. And as a result, people are fracturing in ways that they've always to some degree fractured, but they're fracturing now visibly. They're fracturing on the internet. They're fracturing on our 24-hour news cycle. And that fracturing is being interpreted in a very myopic, simplistic way. Once again, we're ignoring the layers of the onion. And that means we're also ignoring our joint and collective responsibility to address it. And when you think a problem is simpler than it is, you will be brutal, you will be clumsy, and you will do more damage than good. So in light of that, it would be nice to see relationships and families and society indeed not simply seen of purely in terms of, power dynamics, but a more complex range of contributing factors, and to recognise that people are capable of almost anything under the right circumstances. And so creating the right circumstances and building a society of self-responsibility is super important. You need both. You need people to accept ownership for their own lives, ownership for the events that happen to them as well. Bad things happen to everyone. It's not an excuse for bad behaviour. It can't be. But if you don't know that, you didn't grow up with that, you haven't been raised with that, and you're in a section of society where you're being quite literally dumped on over and over again and ignored and told to shut up, well, you're going to vote for the Trumps of the world, aren't you? You're going to vote for the crappy populist right-wingers that promise you everything and give you virtually nothing. You're going to vote for people who look strong because you don't feel strong. You feel disempowered. You're going to think in ways that are toxic. You're going to be angry and upset and very, very sad underneath all of that. And attacking those people in a simplistic way doesn't resolve the problem. It just makes it infinitely worse. We need to attack the enemy, and the enemy is violence. The enemy is hatred. The enemy is ignorance. The enemy is a lack of responsibility, a lack of character on the part of often multiple participants in those family dramas, and a lack of kindness. Jesus Christ, give each other a break, people. We've got to do it. All right, we don't solve these problems by being pedantic lawyers. We solve these problems by being kind, rigorous, and persistent human beings. So let's do that, and let's stop genderfying, ethnicizing, and otherwise partisaning every single major issue that confronts us. We can do better. Let's do better. Cheers, and thanks for that one. Doesn't matter.